What's up? In this podcast, I talked to one of my former students, Ari, who is really into personal development and social intelligence as it relates to a greater spectrum of things. So we ended up having a really great conversation. It started out a little bit rough at first as he was getting comfortable opening up, but if you stick through it, we talk about some really interesting stuff going into tangents about personal development, psychedelics, geopolitics, and self-love. So I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, how's everything been since I last saw you?
Wow, since well, you know, the world has changed quite a bit.
It's been like a year just about, right?
Yeah,
Since we were doing our advanced our specialized skills classes, right?
yeah.
Did we do the assertiveness class? Was the last one? Or maybe something else. I can't remember. It's been so long. Yeah, what's your life been like in the pandemic?
Well, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Zoom, so it's been less social for many of those months. But then more recently, I've just kind of said, to heck with it, and really tried to find other people who are more open to in-person contact with appropriate safety measures.
Yeah, like preparing your body by licking handrails and making sure that you have an boosted immune system, right? Is that what
Exactly.
you mean?
Exactly. Make sure your immune system has lots of practice. It's like muscles. You got to exercise it, keep it in shape.
Totally. That's what I've been doing. I've been, part of that is, dealing with my lungs, just smoking more, just getting
Of
some
course.
exercise with my lungs so that I can more effectively handle that coughing that you get if you do get COVID.
Oh yeah, exactly. I would advocate for some people if you need the extra help, just going up to your car, turning it on, sticking your mouth up to the tailpipe, a couple puffs, quick puffs in the morning, you know.
Right, right. Anyways, yeah, no, it's been crazy because I'm not a fan of the Zoom world either, right? Like I spend all day for work on Zoom. We're on Zoom right now.
Oh,
And yeah. And I'm just not like, I don't know, it's got a bit of something lacking, right? It's like the vibe that you get from just being in person. Obviously, also there's like the touch aspect and just, you know, having somebody around, but um it's definitely missing a little bit. So getting out there, I'm actually going out today to a little mingle happy hour thing in the city, and gonna go meet some people. Last time I went last week, there was, I made a couple friends, and it was really fun. But I've been like ready to break because of the lockdowns. And like now you're in California. California is like
even
10, it's even more locked. It's been the most locked down state in the union. Um and I was like happy to get out of California and like at least be able to go out and do like outdoor dining. Like in July, they like I was in Alameda County and in Oakland, and in July they like shut that down. So
yeah.
it was like ridiculous. And my home county is San Luis Obispo County. 7 COVID deaths before December, like total. So it was just like so silly.
Yeah, no, it's like it's one of those situations where the cure is way worse than the disease.
Totally, totally. But this is not the COVID podcast. I don't want to talk about COVID. I want to talk about social intelligence. I mean, it is relevant to our social lives and social situations. But you know, you took our classes quite a while ago, right? What was it? When did you take your fundamentals class?
That was towards the end of 2019.
And what got you into this stuff? What made you want to like learn more about social intelligence?
Well, mm, I was just kind of at a point in my life where social intelligence was something that really could help me achieve some of my goals. And it wasn't something that I had spent too much time on before. I mean, obviously, I thought about it a little bit here and there, but I just kind of came to the decision that it was something I really needed to work on and kind of smooth out the rough edges, build up some skills, some practice. And yeah, that's just kind of where I was at the time.
Yeah, I think for me, like I got into this stuff because I felt like I hit a rock bottom. You know, I actually got into it. I got into learning about social intelligence and like social psychology. Probably I was around 18 years old, and I got my first real rejection. I was always super shy, so it was like my first actual trying to do anything social that could get me rejected. I was always also really shy, especially with girls, and I went out with this girl, first date, my first date ever, right? And she was cool, and I was enamored with her. I was infatuated by her, 18 years old, you can imagine. And I ended up going on a first date. It was good, but I was 18. I was just out of high school, and I found out on the date that she was actually 16 and she was in high school still. And not a big deal, like in retrospect, but my mom actually had some concerns about the age difference, and I think she was getting a little too much in my business. And she ended up like meeting this girl and like asking for her mom's phone number. Definitely
This,
more
this is
too into her.
before your date,
After our first date.
after the
After our
first date.
first date, yeah, the first date went well. Right? We ended up going mini golfing, and went and got slushies at the 7-Eleven. And then she worked at the laser tag place. That's how I met her. She worked at the laser tag place, and we went and played a free game of laser tag. Dude, that would have been like the perfect first date, like for an 18-year-old, for a teenager. And so I was like infatuated with this girl. My mom ends up calling her mom, and totally, like, I feel like my mom totally like ruined this situation for me. Like it was just not it was not uh like appropriate for her to like get as involved as she did. Anyways, after our second date, this girl rejects me. She's like, I just want to be friends. But she didn't actually mean I just want to be friends, because I kept going to the laser tag place where I met her,
Yeah.
and she was a total bitch. She was a total bitch to me, and I felt like so rejected. And after that, I felt like I hit rock bottom. And because of that, I was like, man, I'm just a fucking loser. Like, girls don't like me. All I want in the world is a girlfriend, someone to love me. And that's when I started reading about like how do I be more attractive to women? How do I be more attractive to women and like be better at dating and stuff like this? So I started reading articles online and like looking into books. I ended up, getting into the pickup stuff and reading all those books there, like, the mystery. This was like after the game came out, like maybe a couple years later. And so this stuff was like had exploded, and I had heard about it when I was in high school. I heard about it in like the late 2000s, and I was like, yeah, I'll go check this out. And then I started like learning about this stuff, and that's what got me into this. Like, was I felt rejected. I felt like I was at like the lowest point in my life, and I needed to come out of my shell and stop being like a really shy nerd.
Yeah.
And in order to, make the connections that I wanted to make. Is that something that, similar to what you were experiencing? You said you felt like you hit some rough spot. And do you want to elaborate on that?
Um, yeah, so the story is somewhat similar to yours, though some of the things that kind of occurred for you all at once were spread out over like a decade or so for me. I wouldn't say that right before the Jaunty class, I had hit rock bottom because I had been in far worse places for on multiple occasions. but it was bad enough that, you know, the only solution was to really take action in, you know, multiple directions. So Jaunty was one of them. Just really getting out there, kind of forcing myself to do the things that produce that internal flinch factor.
Internal what factor?
Flinch,
Flinch.
flinch. So it's
Okay.
like, you know, like approach anxiety, let's say, or the what I really hated was the approach avoidance. Like, oh, I see someone who is attractive, I want to talk to them, and then like the almost instantaneous counter response of, no, but they're gonna hate you or slap you or call the police, or I don't know, all these bizarre, you know, potential disasters would automatically fill my mind and sort of almost in a way like shut down my muscle system so that I like was frozen, right? It was like a not really a flight, but more of the freeze response.
Yeah. You get the shutting everything down. What do we call it? We just basically like um basically, yeah, you're so anxious, you draw a blank. You don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, you
But
freeze up.
yeah, a lot of that too. And a lot of just simply not even making the approach.
Right.
And
And
then,
then and yeah, go for it.
well, another thing I realized early on was that a lot of those excuses were like ridiculous in their severity of the potential disaster, and yet they were still compelling. So even though I knew they were almost certainly ridiculous, they still, on an emotional sort of level, felt very real.
Okay. So like what's an example? What's an example of something that like is going on in your head, or like you were telling yourself that would happen? Like this person will slap me in the face if I go talk to him, or what?
Yeah. Or they, I don't know, call their gigantic ex-football player boyfriend to beat me up.
Right, right. Oh my gosh. So that's happened to me. I've yeah, I remember being out at like a street fair in San Francisco, and walking up to somebody and you know, approaching this pretty woman, and I was like, hey, you know, I saw you standing there, I thought you were interesting, I thought you were cute, whatever. And she's like, oh wow, that's so nice, I'm actually here with my boyfriend, he's right there. And the dude comes up, and I'm like, you know, when I the first time this happened, I didn't really know what to think. I was like, I was like, what do I do, man? And he's like, what's going on? I was like, oh, I was just hitting on your girlfriend. I'm like, and then I just looked up and I was like, you guys make a really cute couple. Have a nice day. I just walked away. But have you ever been with somebody and like you're the you know you're with your girlfriend or wife or whatever, and like somebody else hit on them and then they told you,
Yes, I've had them tell me before. I don't
or
think,
it was blatantly in front of you?
yeah, I can't recall any instances where it was like right in front of my face, but I have had them later on say, oh yeah, I was at the grocery store, right? Like I met her in front of Safeway and I was waiting outside. She went inside and then she comes out and says, oh yeah, this guy, like, you know, told me how cute I look or something to that effect. And I was like, oh, interesting.
And
So
then
yeah, I
I
mean,
think the best route to go is be like, yeah, you do. Just like just make it about you, right? Yeah, you do. And then you like give her a bigger compliment or something. I think like I think men tend to be in like the the paradox of wanting your significant other to look really good, but also wanting them to look homely so that nobody else talks to them.
right. That's why then brings
It's
on the
like Schrodinger's girlfriend, you know.
hot, but not.
Yeah, yeah, it's like simultaneously hot, but nobody will talk to them. But I mean, I mean, once you're like secure, right? If you have a good relationship and you have, high self-esteem and you're secure in yourself, obviously it's not something that's a big deal, right? It's like, oh yeah, my my significant other can go hang out with her friends and she can go out and get hit on. She can get hit on by another guy, and at the end of the day, we're still, she's coming home to me, right? And having that communication, that honest communication, is a lot to get through. It's tough.
It is. And so much of dyadic or relationships, right, between, say, you and your girlfriend, so much of it is really a relationship within her and within you separately at the same time. And then that interaction of your inner relationship with her inner relationship.
Mm,
So
that's
yeah,
deep.
no, as well, it's like you were saying, right? Once you have a certain level of confidence and security in the relationship, then these little things don't worry you because you trust that she's not going to do anything to jeopardize that.
Totally. So okay, so you went on this little journey, right? You started this little journey, because it's always a journey, right? You started this little journey 2019. Some things had been, you know coming up with you, and you felt like you needed to really address them, and you had these fears. And how do you feel since then? What's happened since that time?
I've I've gone into several different social circles, and so my interactions there are relatively, I guess, typical given the wider circumstances. I haven't been doing a lot of approaches, so I'm not sure if I've actually made a bunch of progress there. Though I feel like approaching is just, there's an extra barrier now, right? Because at least in California, a lot of people want,
Yeah, the mind well, in the Bay Area.
in the Bay Area in particular.
The Bay Area is like the mindset. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in Oakland, walking down the street, um empty street. It's like an expressway that like gets onto the freeway. And I'm like walking on the street, and on the side that I'm on, there's an empty field. Like literally, like there's like chain link fence and just like a bunch of grass. And on the other side of the street is probably like 40 yards. It's like a 5-6 lane road, expressway. And so, it's pretty far out. And I'm just walking down the street, and I don't have a mask on because there's nobody around. And, you know, viruses don't spread. It's not it's not the Happening by M. Night Shyamalan. It's not like I'm trying to run from the wind. So I'm like walking down the street, and this dude comes from the other side of the street. He like runs to the corner, presses the button, runs across the street, and comes up to me and says, "Put a mask on."
It's funny that he actually got closer to you, right?
Yeah.
Endangering himself and you.
Yeah. Well, I was practicing my high status body language, walking by. He was probably really attracted to me, is what I'm assuming.
No doubt.
Yeah, he was.
No doubt.
He
Probably
really
one of the-
did want to get closer. He's like, "Is that Craig Gibbons?" Like he recognized me or something.
Yeah.
But no, he came closer to me, and he like ran up to me just to tell me to put a mask on. There's nobody else. For another like quarter mile, there was no other person. And it was just pretty ridiculous, that situation that I was in. But the Bay Area is definitely like one of those places that like people are just more scared and more apt to follow rules. I feel like, just it tends to be a more like progressive area. So people tend to shift towards following authority, which is an interesting social behavior. But yeah, so in the Bay Area, it's been a little bit more of a barrier because, one, that mindset,
Yep.
and two, it's also like the masks and the lack of things being open for so long, right? I mean, at least there's outdoor stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so I have found a couple places where I can do outdoor activities. So that's been nice. And then there are other groups that will, as I said, they'll kind of, I don't want to be all cloak and dagger, but they'll have low key events where like a dozen or so people can all sort of congregate. Um, and though I personally haven't, even walking out, I never wear a mask out when I'm walking. And I've never had anybody come up to me and say like put on a mask, or I have gotten weird glances and disapproving looks, but no one's ever said anything.
And they maybe like they're walking by and they like take the extra step away or something like that, right?
That happens all the time. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes I'll even do that.
It's like at some point, like you stop giving a crap about it, about what other people are thinking. And like obviously, like if you're like, here's the thing: is like I don't care, especially if I'm outside or if I'm in the building that I live in. I'm just gonna walk through and like I don't need to wear a mask. It's I live here, why would I want to feel unsafe? But if I'm out somewhere and somebody like tells me, hey, like I'm concerned, can you please put on a mask? Like I'll be respectful of that. Like I recently joined an organization called MDI. It's men's teams. Have you heard much about this?
Mhm.
So it's like a personal development thing. It's basically not, I don't want to call it a support group, but it's it's like an organization that allows, it's specifically for men, that allows them to create better masculine relationships with other men and create like mentorships and other types of relationships for positive personal development reasons. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we're committing to doing uh, to something, right? Like each person on my team is committing to something and we're holding each other accountable. So we have like 4 months of doing this that we have to do every week. We commit to it. Like one man is doing fitness, another man is doing doing his studies and stuff. So and I'm focusing on creating more content for my personal brand and Jaunty and stuff like that. So making videos, podcasts like this, and we're holding each other accountable. It's like, trying to level up our lives. So I joined this men's team, and one of, in the very beginning, I was in this program where it's like learning how to be on this team, and we had to meet in person, all 6 feet apart in this big circle, masked up in the dark. And I'm like, this sucks. And like people's masks were coming down when they're talking because it's hard to hear. And I didn't give a shit. I was like, this is stupid, like no point. Once meetings adjourned, we can take our masks off and like go about our business, like if we're and bullshit each other. But one of the men on the team, the part of the reason was because he's very, very apprehensive about it, he was very scared of it. And what I learned is like building the relationship with him, he has a physical problem. Like he actually he had a heart surgery early, a few months back, and it was affecting him. So I ended up you know understanding his situation more now. I totally respect that, right? If you want me to wear the mask because you're concerned about getting the virus, because that's actually a health thing for you, like, yeah, totally.
Right,
But
exactly. Exactly. I think it's very important to have that, that understanding, that empathy that everyone's going to be doing things for different reasons and everyone has a different risk profile, right? Like maybe, I have like some diseases, whatever predispositions, I got to be super extra careful. And I respect that. So if someone's wearing a mask, I'm not going to automatically think they're a sheep, even though in the aggregate, most people wearing masks probably are being sheep. But there are plenty of counterexamples. So, right. And so I don't want to be sort of prejudiced from the get-go. So I just assume that everyone wearing a mask has a like really a good reason to do so.
Right. And I think I think there's the difference. So like looking at this from like a social perspective, like it's the difference of how you view your locus of control and locus how you interact with other people, right? Most people are passive, and passive people tend to take responsibility for other people's behavior,
Mm.
right? You know, and having the masks, and I'm not saying everybody who wears a mask all the time has this mindset, but you know, I would say a big portion of the wear a mask thing comes from this sense of responsibility for other people, right? And you know, you start to look in, and this is where like it's been politicized, right? Over the past year, people
Yeah.
start to look at like political leanings when it comes to this type of stuff. It's tends to be people who feel like it's important for you to for an individual to take responsibility for the greater entity of, you know, the community or their country, or you know, whatever it is.
Mm.
And it's a lack of individuality.
Well, I would say it's high conscientiousness.
It Yeah, it is high conscientiousness, and it could also be high. What's the one that makes you more anxious?
Neuroticism.
Neuroticism, yeah. So I mean, high conscientiousness for sure, and it's like it's this thinking of I need to do this because otherwise grandma will die,
Right. Well, also
and
a lot of it is simply they want to avoid social censure, right? The social pressure. There's a lot of social pressure
Mhm.
coming from very high status people, right? Like our news anchors, our government, other governors, whatever, all saying, wear the mask, do this, blah, blah, blah. So that's a ton of social pressure, and most people can't handle that. You know, they'll just
Yes.
go with the herd.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's like passive, right? A
Yeah.
passive person is all about not making waves. They don't want to you know, cause any commotion. They don't Then they want to take responsibility, right? If if I got trouble with somebody, you know, my roommate's not doing his dishes and it's really bugging me, right?
Yeah.
As a passive person, I'm just going to take the shit, right? I might even take responsibility for my roommate and do his dishes for him.
Right.
You
But
know,
probably deep down, they'll be growing resentment.
mhm. Especially, here's the thing, especially if you see the people telling you to do this
Right.
act oppositional to the way that they have been
Yeah.
acting or that they've been saying, right?
Right.
It's like do as I say, not as I do. And you know, people are smart, people can be critical thinkers, and we're starting to see tension, right? What's so crazy is like the like how California has been like literally like 2 days after the election, like okay, it's good, we're at the highest numbers of you know, COVID what's it called,
Cases. Yeah.
diagnosis cases, and let's just relax everything. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, that's obviously like a political power play.
Right.
um and I think people are starting to, and my own grandma, like I spoke to my grandma back in like October. And she's like, well, I was like, how are you feeling about all this? She lives in the valley, and she's like, well, we can't really go anywhere, you know, she's with her boyfriend. And she's like, well, we can't really go anywhere, but you know, the election's coming up. And so I think things will start changing after that.
Yeah.
Like it's like everybody knows, like everybody knows that there's some sort of, there's like an ulterior motive of like power, right? Like a
Right. Right.
people trying to control people in some sort of way. And I'm just like fascinated by this. I've always been fascinated by like uh individual and group like power structures with like how people interact and like how we interpret the world, and like mind control, if you would. I used to have a book on it, a book called Mind Control. But in college, I studied communication and social process, and like lots of these social movements and where they come from and how people become you know, become like charged in one way. There's usually some sort of like manipulation going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Leon Festinger did a lot of interesting, like pioneered the work on this with his cults and how he noticed, right? So the story with Leon is he went to this doomsday cult and he kind of became one of the members, went with them, and then up comes the day when the world is supposed to end, right? Okay, it's like today the world is ending at 10 p.m. And like the excitement of the group is growing and growing. It's like 9:59. Everyone's like holding hands and expecting some cataclysm to happen. And then it get like 10 p.m. Okay, 10:01 p.m. Nothing happens.
Oh.
10:02, nothing happens, and and he was watching the people, and some of them were like, "What the hell?" They like woke up from a dream, like they had been in a trance, and suddenly they're like, "Wait, the world didn't end. What the hell is going on? What have I been believing for the past year? I've totally been scammed." And so they left the cult, but there was another group where they rationalized it to make sense. They're like, oh, because of our incredible devotion, the cataclysm has been moved back 10 years, right? They made up
Oh.
like all these rationalizations.
Yeah. Oh, was that dude who like used a bunch of numbers from the Bible or something? And he's like, oh, this is the day that's going to happen. Not Leon Festinger, but like the other group.
The cult leader. Yeah, no, I don't remember all the details, and
Okay.
I probably messed up on some of the details, but the idea was that there's one group of people who woke up from the trance, realized that they had been scammed, and there was another group of people who got even more into the cult, like even more committed. And so it's very interesting to see that. And I'm seeing that in some ways actually a lot with the current situation.
Well, I think the getting more committed, that comes from like, I put so much investment into this already, I'm going to double down.
Yeah,
This is a cognitive bias or confirmation bias.
confirmation. Yeah,
Basically, when people tend to get information that counters what they believe already, they
they
tend to
ignore it.
double down. They stick to their guns even harder
Right.
than, there's like a certain subset of people, and so that seems to be what's happening, right? It's like,
Yeah. And it's funny because it gets tied in with their identity, right? It becomes part of their sort of egoic self-image. This idea of let's take um, believing in doomsday. Uh, so it becomes like it's become their whole identity, right? Like they've probably sold, maybe they sold their property or something. So they're like super invested in it, and to admit that they were wrong is an enormous blow to the ego, right? And not, of course, it's going to affect everyone differently. Some people's egos will be more sensitive to it than others. But essentially, it's admitting you were wrong, and a lot of people they don't have the ego strength to do that.
what builds that? What builds egos? I mean, maybe lots of failures. I don't know. Like I feel like
Potentially,
us, like people in the personal development, you know, culture, tend
right?
to have less of that egoic, identity, or
You
that
have to.
ego, and
You, you know, like there's no way that you can go out there in a social setting, put yourself out there, face the inevitable hundreds, possibly thousands of rejections of various severity, and just have your ego be like intact. You're either completely psycho, right, like a complete sociopath that feels nothing, right, or you just have to realize that it's not that important, and you can be wrong and still be okay, and you still have a lot of good to offer the world, even if one person on the street doesn't notice it or whatever.
totally. I thinking about the ego and personal development, to create a little tangent for a second. I actually made a TikTok video the other day, where I was talking about psychedelics and how they become, people report them to be really profound experiences. And this TikTok video is actually kind of blowing up. I made it like 2 days ago. It's got like almost 500 likes. And I guess I picked the right sound, and like the right topic, and I used some peer reviewed research articles. But basically, what I was trying to communicate in the video is that the reason why people find really profound experiences when they take enough of a psychedelic drug is because of that ego dissolution or that ego death, the dissolving of this identity that you have with yourself. And because of that, you can then start to look at yourself without bias. You can start looking at yourself as though you're somebody else, right? When I look, when I think about myself, I have this bias, right? Like I have this bias of like, no, like, you know, this is me, you know, I'm gonna like think about all the stupid things I fucked up with on my life, and you know, the mistakes that I'm making, and I'm gonna justify them because I don't want to hurt myself, you know, and my ego, my feelings. I don't want to hurt my own feelings. But when you do that, you're not looking from a mirror, right? Like I'm only looking from my eyes. I'm like looking down at my body and going, this is who I am. But to look in the mirror and see what I look like and see my own flaws, that's the only way to really take away the biases, to have a different perspective. And you know, you get that from other people for sure. But the thing I was talking about with psychedelics is like people get that ego death or ego dissolution, and the research shows that because of that, people become more self-aware and have a lot more awareness of their own habits and behaviors, which is pretty dang interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It allows them to at least put cracks in the shell that they're normally living in, this almost like a prison, the ego prison, right? And they can't see anything beyond it. And then psychedelics, even if temporarily, they put some cracks into that, and you can see a much bigger world, and you can, as you were saying, see yourself in the various different perspectives. And then for a lot of people, there's the acute experience while they're tripping, and then there's the sort of the aftermath of it, or the integration process, which can take weeks or months or potentially years, where some of those insights, which aren't necessarily even conscious, right? A lot of this stuff is subconscious, like their subconscious cracks have been widened, and and then they sort of, and then it spills over the weeks, months, years, whatever, into their day-to-day life. And it can be a profoundly transforming experience, and for most people I highly recommend it. There are some people though who will react very badly and become like
Like
psychotic.
people who have psychosis, yeah, like here's the fair warning for anybody who would be
For sure.
listening to this.
Right.
If you have a predisposition to psychosis, it'll crack you.
Yeah, so you need a good setting, like a good trip sitter, all those things to really make sure. And in fact, now there's this organization called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, something like that. And they're doing a lot of awesome work with MDMA. So, I
Nice.
mean, psychedelics is a huge growth field right now. In 10 years, it'll be almost mainstream medicine, um, enormous potential. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so like okay. First of all, I recommend anybody who's interested in psychedelics look for a shaman. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't mean having somebody with a headdress or and some weird like little bongo drums like taking you through it, but like somebody who's like predisposed to wanting to help people in that type of experience, I feel like, because if you're just taking like MDMA off of some rando or taking, you know, LSD or whatever, you know, whatever these drugs are from somebody, just from a dealer, and you're going to go by yourself and take it, like I feel like that's not a wise experience or, you know, a wise choice
Yeah.
to take.
I mean, you're running unnecessary risks.
Right.
Though
And
personally, I think many people can do that safely, but it's, as far as I know, there's no easy way for the average person to know what category they're going to fall into. And there can even someone who's had 10 awesome trips, their 11th trip could be horrifying. So
oh
it's
yeah.
best always take precautions.
And you know, I think you know, as we were kind of talking about, like you, from your own perspective, you can't really tell what's the best for you all the time.
Right.
And it's helpful to have somebody else like talk to you, get to know you, question you, and see where you're coming from and what point in your life you are, to know if you're ready for that type of experience. Because it's funny is like I've talked to people who would like do cocaine and MDMA and whatever all the time, on the weekends and just go party. And
Right.
I'd be like, oh yeah, like, what do you think about mushrooms? And they're like, whoa, man, that's scary.
It's a
And
different kind of story. Yeah.
yeah, it's a different kind of scary because all those other drugs are, you're escaping, and with psychedelics it's not escape. It's what I would tell somebody is, if you're afraid of who you are, if you're afraid of being with yourself, you're not ready to do psychedelics.
Yeah. I would have to caveat that by saying is you often don't know. For instance, when I first did psychedelics, it was kind of the opposite. I hated myself.
Back in the 70s when you were doing LSD?
Yeah, well, this was the 60s,
Oh,
but
60s. Yeah, right.
I really despised myself. And psychedelics was my way to escape, actually, right?
Interesting.
Because it did sort of dissolve my ego, which was, as it turns out, the thing producing most of my anguish was my own ego. It was like you've heard of autoimmune disorders. So depression, anxiety, those things are often, I kind of think of them as like an autoimmune disease of the mind. So it was like my
Totally.
own mind attacking itself nonstop without remorse. And by taking psychedelics, I could get a reprieve for 3, 4, 5 hours, however long. And so those at the time, those were the best experiences of my life, like better than sex, like just unbelievably amazing.
I don't
And
believe you.
what's that?
I don't believe that statement.
Oh no, it really was though. Um,
um okay, yeah, I
also, I had
mean,
sex at the time, so
yeah, I was a complete virgin, but no, well, then try it on sex, or try sex on it, then see what
yeah,
happens.
that I have not done. But
Yeah, it kind of might take away the boner. What, I like how you kind of described depression and anxiety as like an autoimmune disease of the mind, because I'm I have PTSD and I've had bouts of depression. And the interesting thing about, like, in medical psychology community, right? PTSD, they actually tried to change to PTSS, post traumatic stress syndrome, because it's not a disorder. It's actually how your mind is supposed to work. It's meant to protect you from those types of situations. It's meant to create an avoidance of dangerous situations that would put you in harm's way. And the same thing with like depression is like, I think this is how I interpret it. It's like, if you're depressed, you're probably living a life that you shouldn't be living. And what I
or
mean is not you shouldn't be living life, because that tends to be how people interpret it if nothing around them changes. I feel like depression comes from this like lack of being in alignment and feeling fulfillment, being in alignment with your values, right? It's like, you want to be with, you think it's important to be with family, you think it's important to be, have your space and get out and exercise and be healthy, right? Physically healthy. And you think it's important to, follow a cause and have some sort of something that's like overarching that you're a part of, right? And if you're not living that, you're probably going to be depressed. Um,
I think it'll certainly contribute. Though there's many, so research now is really getting at the fact that there's many subtypes of depression, and they have different etiologies and different prognoses, and even different interventions will work better or worse for different subtypes of depression, right? So some of them, they can start from not living in alignment with your values. Let's call it like your social world is not conducive to you thriving. But if you're in that situation for many years, it kind of gets ingrained in your physiology. And then even when you're put in the optimal situation, social situation, like the inertia that's built up in your physiology can kind of not allow you to really benefit from that new external circumstances. And that's happened to me many times. And I told it, it's like some people in the past, I would say, it's like sometimes I wake up and I look at my life and I'm like, whoa, like my life is actually pretty good. And yet I still kind of think of myself as I'm in the situation from when I was a kid, right? It's like my self-image hadn't updated to the new reality. It was still
Right.
stuck 20 years ago.
Right. You're running on old software. Like
Yeah,
you're like you've been in that for so long that like the transition, the change, you're not flexible to it.
right.
And I think like a lot of depression is living in the past, anxiety is living in the future, and we like lack living in the present, right? We're never living in the present. We're always like trying to keep up with the Joneses, living in the future, being anxious about what's going to happen, or we're thinking, man, it was good when I was 6 years old,
Right, right. Like
But
the,
yeah, but like that, what you're saying is that ingrains as like habits, like within your body, it ingrains that feeling, of like I'm out of alignment. And yeah, I think you ever been like completely depressed and like you fucking hate your job or whatever it is, whatever's going on, and then that the day you quit your job, you're like, yes, I feel amazing, or whatever it is. You make some decision and you feel amazing for like a couple days. And I think this elation comes from this idea that like now I'm moving forward with life. And it I think you'll still like if you just achieve whatever you wanted and then sit on your laurels, you're going to get depressed again,
yep,
just because you're not really moving. You're just found a new status quo and you're like not really challenging yourself. I think a lot of life is all about challenging yourself beyond what you can do. And it's not necessarily about making the progress, but it's about making moves to make progress. And once you're in that mindset of I'm going to try to achieve something, you're going to be happier. And like depression, suicide rates, things like that, those aren't really in America, they're the lowest in inner city neighborhoods where people are really, really poor and they're just focused on the struggle and trying to get out.
yeah. Um, so I think though at a certain point, if you're really attempting to achieve things and failing and failing and failing with very little, say, positive reinforcement, that can also either lead to depression or lead to worse depression. But what you're saying about taking action, making movement forward, that definitely sort of it fuels hope, right? It fuels hope, and it can give you that sort of self-reinforcing motivation, like, oh, I'm doing it good, I'm doing something for myself, maybe I'm making a tiny bit of progress. um, but one thing you mentioned, which I think is very interesting and gives us a lot of insight into human psychology, is that if you're just resting on your laurels, you're likely to become like to spiral down again, right? Become depressed. And so what we all have is we have like a hierarchy of problems in our minds, and we tend to focus on the top few, right? Let's say a job. Oh, terrible job. That's where all your attention goes. And then you leave your terrible job and suddenly that top slot is open. So for a little while, nothing fills it and you feel great. But then the number two problem gets promoted to the number one problem. And then that starts to grab up your attention. And the thing is the mind, in its attempt to protect you, it has an enormous list of potential problems, right? Of things that might go wrong, of things that it's concerned about, anxious about. And so what it does is when the top problem is dealt with, right, it just promotes the next one. And it has an infinite list of these things. And that's why you see people like Hollywood actors, right? Excellent example. They have everything that a human being should want, right? They've got money, fame, they're I mean, what
Access to any resource they need.
they
Yeah.
got all the resources, they got all the love, and yet why do so many of them devolve into drugs and alcohol and depression and all this crazy shit? It's because they haven't dealt with the fundamental glitch in the human software, right? Which is this ego, which is there to protect you, but it runs amok, right? It loses sight of its overall mission, and all it does is like find problems and try to solve them and make you anxious in the meantime.
Well, I think part of life is overcoming problems. And if we don't have a problem, what's the point in living? Right?
Well,
Like what
there,
if there's
so
no obstacle? I'll say problem, but obstacle is what I mean.
no, no.
Right.
So let me. I understand what you're saying, but let me stop you there
Okay.
because the people that I work with, and in fact, the mission sort of my company is the solution exactly to that issue. That you can actually be incredibly happy, not just happy in the normal sense, but you can be like super happy, let's say, like a transcendent level of joy, of universal love, and you don't have to do anything, just sitting on the couch staring at the wall, right? So the idea that, oh, I always have to be in motion, I always have to be conquering, while I think that can be a productive drive and that motivation can be good, it's not necessary for you to enjoy life. You can enjoy life just living on a beach,
So
like a
okay.
beach.
Yeah, no, I mean, I, w- I'm not saying um like, okay, for instance, when it comes to happiness, and I like the word enjoyment because that fits into like the positive psychology model of happiness in the tier of like living, having enjoyment, having some sort of mental challenge, right? The reason why we enjoy playing games is because there's a bit of a challenge. And when I said like obstacles, that's like a challenge. That's, we create problems out of some obstacles though. And when they become too high, too hard for us to handle, they become frustration, or our emotional state becomes frustration. That starts to get into, if it's been there long enough, we're not happy. We're depressed.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And
that's a good distinction, right? So like you're saying, obstacle is not the same as a problem, is not the same as a frustration. It's like increasing levels of discomfort or dissatisfaction with each level.
yeah, and we tend to, I mean, I it's funny. I think of like enjoyment, and you could watch a dumb TV show and go, this is dumb, but then maybe you smoke weed and you're like, wow, this is really funny, right? Or you practice meditation and being very, very mindful and very, very present, and you find more engagement, like that your body and your mind are engaging in the world in just simple tasks, right? Like sweeping a floor. You're finding engagement, you're finding a challenge in the perfection of getting all the dust off of that floor, right? Or something like that. That becomes more enjoyable, right? Versus, and then there it goes in the other direction too, right? Like if if something is too much, we tend to try to unplug from it and like focus on something else, or
Right,
something
right.
smaller.
And that touches on such a key point, which is that the distaste or the enjoyment, it really happens in you, in your mind, not out in the world. There's no such thing as an enjoyable activity in the world, right? It's an enjoyable activity if your mind wants to think of it that way, wants to interpret it that way. And so that's why you could be doing so, and this has happened, to me. Let's say I'd be hanging out with my girlfriend or something, having a great time, but I wasn't fully enjoying it because I wasn't fully present. And my mind was saying, oh no, you've got homework to do, or oh no, you've got this project, or oh no, you've got to fix your car, or blah, blah, blah. And all those things were in my mind, right, distracting from my enjoyment of the moment. Conversely, there have been times when I literally was sweeping up dust And I thought, wow, I was just really immersed in the experience. Like, oh, look at how the sun rays reflect off the dust in the air, right? Look at how these little dust globules form. And like, oh, look at the grain of the wood and all this stuff. And I was really immersed in the experience, and it was awesome, right? But someone looking from the outside sees me sweeping up dust, and they're like, what kind of a pathetic thing is that? You know, how could you possibly enjoy sweeping dust? But I did.
Totally. That's, man, we went down a weird rabbit hole here, because I was thinking about some like two other tangents, and I just got lost in thinking about dust trails and like like sunbeams. Um,
And so a lot of it comes down to your perspective, right? And so as you mentioned, like, I don't know, half an hour ago or something, right? If you're depressed, that's associated with living in the past. If you're anxious, that's associated with living in the future. But if you're truly present, and unless you're in some sort of physical pain, the present moment is at worst neutral, right? Like, you know, you could imagine yourself, well, all my future is taken care of. Like, I have a fairy godmother who will come down and bless me with wealth and health and wonderful people to love me, blah, blah, blah. Then, and you forget about whatever happened in the past, then, you know, sitting here is fine. And with the proper training and the proper way of shifting your perspective, actually, and Buddha even says this, the fundamental nature of human physiology is not negative or neutral. There's actually a slight positive bias to it. If you really go deep into your internal experience, there's, for most
well,
people,
it
there's a
has to
lot of
be.
yeah, there's a lot of garbage on top. But when you really go deep in, you find there's a very loving, joyful, almost like an infinite wellspring of love and joy, which you can tap into. It's
I,
just
I
hard to do so.
I think there has to be. I think there has to be that positive energy. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist, right? Like,
Hmm.
uh, we constantly sell ourselves this idea of balance. Like, there's balance in the universe, the fact that I can live a work-life balance, and all that balance. Like, there may be balance, but balance is never in a moment. Balance is never in an individual point in time and space.
Right.
It's always, the highs come with lows, right? Or, the highs come with lows. There's a scale, right? It's going up and down constantly. And you're spinning plates, right? Eventually those plates are going to wobble, and you got to go back to them. And, my health, I need to work on my health. I'm going to spin this plate. Oh
Yeah.
shit, I forgot about my family life. I got to go spin this plate. Oh shit, I got to go back to my health. I got to go back to my work. I got to go, right? You're spinning all these different plates, and we're selling ourselves this idea that we can have complete balance all the time.
Mm.
And that would assume that life is just neutral, right? The way that like life forms in the universe is that there's energy over here, and it's taken somehow from, in some process, it's taken over here and combined with energy over here and materials over here, and then life is able to live, right? There are gaps that are created that need to be filled eventually, right? It's like taking out a loan, right? You take out, I got the money. I'm buying my house with a mortgage. Well, I still got to pay that shit back, right? Nothing is free. And maybe overall I'm going to be able to create something of it. My equity is going to go up, right? Like the house is going to increase in value, and I'm going to be able to sell it for more than I paid for it eventually. But there's still something that you have to pay, or there's still always going to be an other side of it.
For sure. And, you know, it's the same with, like, you could think of it the same with how you apportion your time, right? So if you put a lot of time, like you were saying, into the health, then there's less time maybe for the family. So there's like these, it's all cost benefit. You buy a home, well, then that's an awesome benefit, but the cost is you have to now pay off the mortgage. You know, that's in within the temporal world, like of of time, that yes, like what you do in this moment takes away from everything else you could have been doing in that moment. But it doesn't, kind of tying it into the what we were saying before, you can still enjoy that, whatever it is, right? Like you can enjoy spending time with your family, and you can enjoy working on your health, and you can enjoy paying back your mortgage, working at your quote unquote terrible job.
Yeah.
Because, right, each of those exists in a moment. It's always just this moment that you're doing any of them. And you can always enjoy this moment regardless of what occurs during this moment.
I think no, I'm just gonna agree. I don't know. I don't know where to go from there. If I love chocolate. If I ate only chocolate all day every day, I would get tired of it,
Probably,
right?
if you didn't die
But
first.
right. Yeah, how much chocolate am I eating? But if I ate only chocolate all day every day for the rest of my life, I'd probably get tired of it. And um the thing is, I have to get away from it. I have to have a vacation from it, from chocolate. I have to fast to enjoy to in order to appreciate it more. So yeah, I love, I think it's important to spend time with my family, but I also think it's important to spend time at work. But if I do too much of either, I'm gonna I'm gonna resent both of them, or either of
Yeah.
them. We're talking about drugs. My favorite subject. We're talking about drugs. Um and I was gonna say, it's so interesting how, like, talking about psychedelic drugs can just lead you down this entire path of conversation to talking about personal development and developing as we got into talking about enjoyment and positive psychology and balance and life and Buddhism, like just from saying something about psychedelic drugs.
Well,
And well,
well, I mean, so right, psychedelics, like they change your very perception of reality, and your perception of reality is everything, right? We could have gone on to AIDS. We could have talked about dirt and how, psychedelics alters your perception of dirt, right? It's like, everything in nature is connected. Everything is within a particular, you can't understand an object in isolation. It only exists relative to a larger context. And psychedelics tap into the largest possible context because they tap into the very meaning of who you are, what the universe is, right? So yeah, I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense that drugs would lead anywhere.
yes. um and to the context of social process and interaction with power structures, I think it's so crazy and not crazy at the same time that psychedelic drugs have been the most outlawed drugs in America and a lot of Western world. They're, I think, Schedule 1, right? Like most
Yeah, it's
psychedelic
it's
drugs.
changing, but let's say 20 years ago, yeah, they were all Schedule 1, like, lumped up there with heroin and I don't know, like
Yeah,
fucking
certain
crazy.
municipalities have decriminalized them, like Oakland,
Right.
California, Denver, Colorado. I think maybe even New Jersey or Massachusetts might have. But yeah, so
Oregon, I think Oregon recently passed
Oregon too. Yeah.
resolution.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I mean, it's definitely a conversation that's been had many times on many couches in
Sure.
smoky rooms. But but in regards to like why that is, and like, and what people have to, what any individual or group would have to gain from outlawing these drugs, from outlawing anything, or controlling, telling you to, or mandating you to wear a mask, or mandating that you can't go to work or else you'll get fined, as was the case in the beginning of the pandemic in the Bay Area. I knew people who were getting fined for going to work. So like, here's the thing, this is like the Terrence McKenna, like, people will say, drugs, these drugs are not illegal because your government is afraid that you're going to jump off of a balcony and kill yourself or hurt yourself. These drugs are illegal because they help dissolve these power structures and make you look. I can't think of the exact quote, but like, look at the power structures and look at
Yeah, you can see through their bullshit, right? You realize how they're controlling you through the these weird sort of conceptual structures. Uh, so as an extreme, there's things like the Ten Commandments, like thou shalt not murder, which I think is a is a good idea, and everyone should abide by it.
Yeah, I think that's a but we I mean but,
You know,
but
but at
we
an
have
extreme,
government sanctioned murder all the time. That's the crazy
well,
thing too.
yeah, that's yeah. But at the same time, it really is kind of a concept, right? There's no, if you take a baby and you teach them that murder is good, then they would think murder is good. So what happens in our society is we're taught things like murder is bad, which I agree with, but we're also taught a whole shitload of other things. Like, why is a handshake the traditional Western culture gesture when you meet somebody? It's completely arbitrary, right? We could have started off with elbow bumps. We could have started off with hugging or a bow,
I think
right?
it started with checking to see if somebody has a knife on them
Okay,
underneath their
so
suit.
there's various explanations, but the point is essentially it's arbitrary. How come the Japanese don't do that and they do a bow, right? It's like a random cultural thing. Same comes down to a lot of the laws we have in, say, particular the United States, but every other country also. A lot of them are just like really arbitrary, right? There's no good reason for them. And it turns out that when you really examine these reasons, we have a lot of these laws because some special interest group, some very small subcategory of people profits. Sometimes they profit a lot by having that particular law enforced. You know, classic pork barreling, right? You look at these like COVID relief bills, and why are they like, 1,000 pages long with like little bits of money over here, bits of money over there, bits of money there, blah blah, blah, like all over the place. When really, what's the most of the country wants is just your $1,000 check to every person who's out of work, right? Some very simple, basic things like that, and you get all this pork barreling, thousands and thousands of pages of it. And
Yeah.
so when you take things like psychedelics, you break out of these conceptual chains and prisons, or at least you get a glimpse beyond them. And so you start seeing all this stuff for the bullshit it is. And the danger, if it's one or two people, whatever, it's hard for them to change the world. They can do it in tiny little ways. But if you have like thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people suddenly realizing the mental chains that have been put on them and breaking free of that, oh, you got disaster for those people who profit and off of people being under mind control.
I think as it relates to like the COVID thing, and as we were saying with the masks, right? Um, though it's, I don't need to be wearing a mask while I'm driving my car, by myself. But I still see people doing it, you know. And it's a bit of that fear, that mind control of the also what we were talking about, people being passive too,
Yeah.
right? And and taking responsibility and whatnot, and just that group pressure. And I think part of an important part of mind control, as well as cults, as we bringing back Leon Festinger, part of cults is creating the other, right?
Mm.
Creating the opposition, the evil, learning that something is sin, or somebody is a sinner, or in whatever regard, right? And what we do is then we label that, we create a name. Don't hang out with the nerds, don't hang out with the geeks, we don't like them. And as it slowly emanates into the culture, people then identify as people who do not who do not associate with those people.
Right.
And this is a social process that happens, um, because we want to fit in. and we want to be accepted. And if I'm like, I don't like those people and you like me, you're going to be like, yeah, I'm not one of those people, right? And this is
Well,
part of go
yeah,
for it.
it's even worse than that, because then not only do certain people get demonized, but you can associate things with them and then demonize those things by association, right? So now I've noticed the growing trend of anything that the mainstream media doesn't like is labeled conspiracy theory.
Right.
Ooh, conspiracy theory. And once you label it as that, suddenly people like don't even bother looking at it, because, oh no, conspiracy theory, that's for crazy people in tinfoil hats who live under rocks and are like low social status losers, probably nerds too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that's a great topic, the conspiracy theory stuff, because conspiracy theories, like what it is it's a theory about conspirators doing something that is bad, or that is set up, it's behind the scenes against what the narrative is. And just because it's a conspiracy theory does not mean it is not true. I mean,
Exactly.
we look at the like martyring of Alex Jones, and
Right.
like I literally had a conversation with a young lady I was dating um the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and she said something about she like made a joke about, oh no, like the like chemicals in the water turn the frogs gay. And I was just like she just brought it up, and she was just making, like I said something about a conspiracy theory or
Yeah.
something. I don't know. I can't remember. I was
Right,
like
right, right.
watching TikToks and I got down like a weird rabbit hole. And and I was like, well, I'm like, do you even know what that's about? She's like, yeah, that guy, he's like crazy. And I'm like, no, but like, do you know what he's talking about when he's saying that? He's saying there's this pesticide that is still used in America, and it gets into runoff and gets into local water, gets into water supplies and rivers and creeks and stuff like that. And what it was doing, it was demasculating male frogs. It was lowering their
Right.
testosterone. It was also causing them to grow ovaries and causing the females to stop being able to produce to ovulate.
Right.
And the whole thing was, these frogs weren't mating.
Yeah.
And so it was like, it's turning the frogs gay. It was just like it was like a micro it was like a
Right.
micro expression of the whole thing.
Right.
And
Right.
this is a real thing. I mean, like, and
Yes.
Alex Jones has been right about a lot of stuff, like the Black Bloc protesters and at the um World Trade
Center.
Conference, and lots of things. And he was in like Bohemian Grove filming and shit, like back in the day. Like that was, he said a lot of stuff, and a lot of the stuff he's talked about has come out to be true. Which makes, it doesn't surprise me much. But now I'm
Oh,
also thinking about like psychic vampires and
well,
interdimensional.
okay. So so here there's a lot to be said out of this, and one of it is that a lot of people now are holding ideas responsible for the people who believe in them, right? Like, oh, this bad person happened to say this thing, so this thing must be stupid and evil, as long as it, goes against the narrative, right? So if somebody says, well, Alex Jones believes in that, suddenly it's that
Everything is
idea is
discredited.
tarnished,
Right.
right? Like, no, there could be, what, Alex Jones also believed in drinking water to stay healthy. Does that mean I'm going to stop drinking water just because Alex Jones believes in it? Of course not, right? That's an absurd, completely illogical argument. And another one is the straw man, like with the turning frogs gay. So let's say, even if that is an accurate quote, yeah, maybe it's not turning frogs gay, but once you look into it a little bit, you realize that yes, there is a huge problem there, and it does relate to, let's say, reproduction,
Reproduction.
sexuality and reproduction, right? So, but again, the people who defend the dominant narrative will take this straw man argument, shoot it down, and act like they shot down the real argument. And then, of course, people who just watch CNN or whatever, they see it. Oh, look! Oh, that was so stupid. Oh, look how easy the newscaster made it look stupid. It must be dumb. and they don't have the time or the energy or the desire to actually look into the thing and see what's really going on. They just believe whatever they're told.
It's so hard being a free thinker these days.
Hell yeah. It's a full-time job, honestly, because there's so much bullshit out there,
and you have to pick and choose of like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna, what hill am I gonna stand on, like
Exactly. I know. Like, I keep myself well informed about several topics, but that leaves dozens and dozens of other important topics that I don't know what to think about them.
Yeah,
There's
and I think a lot of it too is like it and going back to the like creating problems and like getting depressed. Like you could easily get caught up in all of this. You could easily get caught up in like all this stuff that's gonna make you like worried and depressed. And I think reasonably like apprehensive and worried coming into um the COVID and the lockdowns and everything, like
yeah,
going into it, I was worried about a lot of things. The financial structure, the Federal Reserve just printing money like crazy. I was worried about, you know, how the emotional and mental state of people was going to be affected by this. Um, and like this was something that people started talking to a few months into the pandemic, but like I was worried about it day one. Like I was like thinking about it because this is obviously something I it's part of my life and who I am. It's like social interaction and psychology and how people,
mhm,
people's happiness. Like that's definitely something that's on my mind. And then another thing was, I was thinking it's going to start getting dangerous. Like I like one, like the first week of the pandemic, one of my friends called me and was like, we were talking, we are like, okay, should we like get gold and guns? Like, should we like should I buy a gun? Because I knew that I just felt like there was going to be tensions, and there definitely were. I actually started getting stalked by this guy in Oakland, and there was a lot of tension with BLM and the riots and all that stuff. So, you know, there, I feel like I did predict a lot of that pretty well, but I didn't, I could have very easily gone down the rabbit hole because like for 2 or 3 days, I was just looking up tactical gear. I'm like, how am I going to get out of here? Like in case, how am I going to bug out? Like
bug out,
that was
right,
what I
right.
was thinking. I'm like,
Yeah,
all right, I need to get like, man, should I get a motorcycle? Because I can't be going on a road like on a car if the
mm,
street roads are jammed and stuff. Like a motorcycle would be the best form. I'm just like thinking about all these things. This is my PTSD mind too. I'm like going through all the scenarios of like, how am I
yeah,
going to get
yeah.
out of here?
So was
Speak
I.
to my
I
family and
went I
stuff.
went through something very similar, analyzing all that stuff, all sorts of levels of kind of defensive triage, right? So how bad, if things get X bad, then I should respond with Y. If things get Z bad, I need to be ready with, you know, double Z or whatever it is, right? Various levels. And I mean, personally, I think that's very smart to be taking these things because you have to be prepared for these things before they happen, right? Like right now, if you go and you try to buy a gun, it's like first of all, a lot of guns are simply out of stock. Not to mention the ammo is just
Oh my God.
impossible to find. And if you can find something, it's 3, 4, 5 times more expensive than it was just a year ago.
Right.
So, getting on these things proactively before you need to do so, I think of it as like insurance, right? If you're a homeowner, you probably have fire insurance, flood insurance, maybe even like, burglary insurance. And how often do you get a fire that burns your house down, a flood, or burglars, right? It's not that often. And yet, every month you have to pay an insurance premium. So I see basic prep things like having your self-defense and your food supply and water supply and your evacuation plan. Yeah, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes money, but it's insurance against things going bad. That doesn't mean things will go bad. It just means you need to have insurance in case they do.
Right. Right. And some of these food supply things and like things that you can prep for, you can get prepackaged at infowars.com.
Sponsor shout out.
Please sponsor me. That'd be so funny. But yeah, totally. Like, but you know, I think every dude has like as at some point in their life like thought of, you know, being a superhero, or like what would I do in the case of a burning building or whatever, you know, somebody came in here and it was like an emergency situation. I'm like that person to the nth degree when it comes to like doomsday prepping. I'm like, I want like a base inside of a mountain. And like it's
Yes.
got to be next to a river so I can actually get like hydroelectric power and
Yeah.
clean water. Like I'm just
You
like
you've thought about this almost as much as I have.
yeah, well, almost. I mean, maybe you have thought about it more if you do have the mountain.
Well, I don't have the money to buy the mountain, but if I had the money, I'd have the mountain.
Well, if you're inside the mountain, nobody's gonna really know, right? So
I've thought about that too. All sorts of, yeah. So for instance, right, you want like air and stuff, but if shit really gets bad, you're gonna need a way. The way I just thought about it is you have like your big door. Obviously, it's like steel reinforced and all that. But then you have a big pile of rocks with a remote control
oh
detonator.
yeah, and it'll,
So you can be on the inside and then you spring it, the rocks cover, boom, you're now sealed off.
how do
And
you get
nobody
out?
even knows you're there.
Well, maybe you have like a boring machine or something like that, right? You could bore yourself out. That'd be something.
Yeah, or you have time. Well, you're going to need some fresh air. So I thought about
Ventilation,
different
yeah.
ways of, but there's actually on submarines. You probably didn't know this, but they have. I think I forget what it's called. Not chlorates. It's some sort of device where you can really keep a lot of oxygen in a very dense package, and then in submarines, what they do is they'll burn them, and then you can re-oxygenate your environment. But then you also need scrubbers to take out the CO2. It's a whole thing which requires, it's not just living in a cave, right? You need you need shitloads of money to pull this off.
All right, let's just get to Mars, like,
Well,
and then we'll have our own planet. And we're chilling out there for a while until
then you have to
somebody
make
gets.
your own atmosphere. That's even
Well, but
harder.
that's but then you don't have anybody fucking with you. You know what I'm saying? Like,
It's true. It's true. Except the Martians.
yeah, we'll see. Could be having
See,
some.
they're already living underground, ready to pop up.
Right. I don't know why people think these conspiracy theorist people are crazy though.
Okay. Oh, you know what? So that's good. Getting back to that, right? Let's look at, say, Einstein's theory of relativity. Back in the 1910s and 20s, when it first came out, a lot of physicists believed that as essentially the same thing as a physics conspiracy theory. Oh, relativity, light rays bend in gravitational fields, blah, 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 ha, ha, ha. That's ridiculous. In fact, almost every great scientific theoretical innovation was viewed as ridiculous conspiracy theory lunacy when they first came out. So just because something is not fitting in the dominant narrative does not mean it's wrong. On the other hand, if you believe every conspiracy theory out there, well, yes, then you're an idiot because there's a lot of there's no shortage of bullshit out there from the dominant narrative and from competing narratives. They're both of those are chock full of bullshit.
Right. And sometimes here's the like social mind control thing. Sometimes there's controlled opposition
Mm-hmm.
where there's a created narrative that is wrong, and just to discredit other created narratives that are associated.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
like
that,
QAnon or something.
yeah, like QAnon, or maybe even Pizzagate. Like, interestingly, a few years ago, I listened to this podcast, Tim Dillon, if you know him. He's like he likes to talk about conspiracy theories and stuff. He's a comedian, but he talked about this documentary called Who Took Johnny, and it's about Johnny Gosh, the like first real kid to be on like a milk carton, who was abducted in like the 80s.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was the mother of Johnny Gosh actually kind of, because he wasn't because he was a kid from like the Midwest, he had a family, and like his mother was like determined. She kind of just uncovered this ring of child slavery and sex trafficking.
Mhm.
And usually the targets were kids who were orphans, or they were foster kids,
That nobody would miss them.
runaways. Nobody would, yeah, exactly, easy targets. And what they found was like there were government officials covering it up, there were police departments covering up, there were, it was funded by this man named Lawrence King, or Larry King, who was not Larry King Live, but like he was like some bank guy, some banker. um Anyways, but they never really took him all the way down. They just took down this little piece of it with Larry King, and there's it still was around. Well, around the same time that this documentary comes out. um oh, and also like there are some people who actually ended up getting out and started testifying, like the guy who abducted Johnny Gosh. He was actually a kid, he was a sex trafficked kid too. Anyways, he came out, and he went to prison and ended up kind of spilling a little bit of what he knew about this stuff and how it's still going on. And basically around the same time, this is when, like, right before like the Epstein stuff started happening. Well, the Epstein stuff starts happening, and then there's this whole Pizzagate conspiracy. And a lot of what's in the Pizzagate conspiracy is just like unfounded shit. It's like, oh, they're using these code words, and what they could be, right? But there's nothing that you can really validate.
Right.
And lots of these people are going really crazy around this, and then it just sounds really ridiculous. And then some dude goes into the Comet Pizza with a gun, and like saying he's looking for pedophiles, and creates this big scene, and it makes everybody look like
Yep.
everybody look like a bunch of crazy conspiracy nuts and tinfoil
Right.
hats and all that. In
Right.
fact, maybe we should put on tinfoil hats, though. I don't know, like I feel like we're getting lots of radiation all the time. I need a Faraday cage, otherwise
Right.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
get like a brain tumor. Anyways, but yeah, so like these controlled oppositions are ways that people try to create alliances and in thought, right? Alliances and enemies in thought. And it's the same as what we were talking about of, don't hang out with this person, they're a nerd, right? It's like, let's create an opposition so that I can be your alliance, and now you're going to listen to me.
Right. Or another thing is that it keeps people from allying with, again, it gets back to like, oh, if it's tarnished as a conspiracy theory, then I don't want to be associated with that. And so it keeps those people isolated and essentially weak. Now, without getting into geopolitics too much, if I was trying to take down a very militarily powerful foe, right? One that I couldn't, I mean, this is classic like Sun Tzu Art of War. I can't conquer them on open battlegrounds. Well, I'm going to have to do things like guerrilla warfare, disinformation campaigns, blow up their supply lines, do all sorts of things to weaken them as a society, as an economy. And that the spill on effect or spillover effect will be to weaken them militarily, right? Or weaken their power, their ability to exert power in the wider world.
Changing their culture.
Change their culture, make them fight themselves, divide and rule. And of course, I would ally myself with members, high power individuals within that own society who are willing to be traitors and willing to be Benedict Arnolds and sell out their country because they don't really believe in a country to begin with. They've got enough money and connections elsewhere that if where they currently call home, goes underwater, it doesn't matter because they have a new home in New Zealand or something like that, right? So they don't care about any particular country, right? And of course, I would enlist them to help me achieve my aims of destroying my opponent. And another thing that I would do is if somebody
it's like taken straight out of Mean Girls. Like that's what I feel like.
Yes,
like
yes. See, people don't realize how actually amazing of a movie Mean Girls is. right?
Like
You
they
know,
know, people know it's amazing, but they don't
okay,
know the geopolitical implications.
right. Okay, they don't know how to apply it in a larger context,
Yeah.
right? And again, if I was this hypothetical country, I would look at, oh, maybe other countries have already been in opposition and they've already started and gotten certain movements going, which I can kind of take over. They failed to defeat this group of people, this militarily supreme group of people. They failed, but a lot of the things they started are there for me to take over, right? A lot of the disinformation, a lot of the sort of the scams, the social engineering aspect of turning people against each other, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Somebody else started it, but I can take over and see it to its finish.
Yeah, without getting too geopolitical.
I'll name the phrase, without naming names.
Yeah, without naming names, exactly. You can make your own assumptions on who they would be, who these entities would be. I love this. This is, yeah, I love these types of conversations, especially with people who are I feel like you and I are very like-minded, or aligned in a similar fashion of like how we view these types of things, especially with politics and just like current events, like what's going on.
Oh
I
yeah,
thought that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I felt like we could have some interesting topics to like really get into. And I feel like we only just touched the surface, right? Like we could take any of
yeah.
these like 4 or 5 topics that we really went into and like break them down further.
Oh yeah. I mean, these are rabbit holes, which, and who knows what mysterious caverns they lead to if you follow them far enough.
Well,
But
hopefully those caverns are in a mountain.
with a good supply of oxygen and CO2 scrubbers.
Right. All right. Well, listen, Ari, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Is there, I want to start wrapping things up, because I want to be respectful of your time, and I really appreciate it. But is there anything that you wanted to talk about before we do?
I don't have anything specific. I think we kind of got a little bit off topic, or at least broad in the topic of, say, social interactions and the things that that are maybe on brand for you.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe your brand is conspiracy theories.
I think social intelligence, like social interaction, goes beyond just me interacting with you or me interacting with a group of people. I think it goes into the social interaction that you have with yourself, as we discussed in the psychedelic portion of our
Yeah,
conversation. And I think social interaction goes beyond individuals and turns into entities and turns into organizations. It turns into groups of people and how they interact, how they respond. I love that type of shit. So I love those conversations, and it's definitely on brand for me. So I think anybody who's interested in social psychology, and how people work, they want to know how people work on a small level, probably just about as much as they want to know how people work on a big level. So it's it's definitely something that I feel we got a great conversation out of.
yeah, yeah.
Anyways, cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I'd be happy to have you again sometime. Getting this information out to the Jaunty community and anybody else into personal development. I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to use it for the little nuggets that I've gotten from this.
Right. So you're going to take everything I say out of context, like little sound bites, and make me look
Yes.
like a.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.